Hey crafters, thanks for joining me. Today I'm going to make a Northern Lights card with element ink blending. Hope you enjoy! So I started this card by using some lime punch ink and putting it in various stripes going on a diagonal line from the top left to the bottom right. And I was just putting it in random places where I thought it looked nice. I didn't worry too much about blending it yet. Then I did the same thing with the violet chalk, and I made sure that these two colors didn't mix because I didn't want to get any browns on the background. Then I went in with my darkest blue. This is the blue Lagoon, and I put this around the two colors already on my background. And this is about the top half of the background that I covered. And to stop getting any more smudges on the bottom part of the card, I just used a bit of scrap paper there. So then I just went back in with the blue Lagoon and I blended this over the blue areas. Now instead of blending in circles like I normally do, I blended this blue in diagonal lines, sort of following that same direction from the top left to the bottom right. And I wanted to do this to make the ink look like it was going in this direction. I didn't worry too much about any of the splotchy areas because I knew that I wouldn't see them in the finished background. So then I went in with my lighter blue color and blended this along the whole bottom. This way the Northern Lights takes up the top 3/4 of the card. And then I blended this over all three of the colors, and I just left a tiny bit of that lime punch in the middle of each of the green stripes. And I left that untouched, but everything else I blended this light blue over top of. And I just love the effect that you get from blending these colors together. Now I did go in with the violet chalk again and just darken up those purple bits, and also with the lime punch, and just made sure that was nice and bright. And then I just blended this again with that same light blue color. Now you could leave your background like this, but I wanted to give it an even more realistic look. So I just sprayed a little bit of water on my craft desk and used a paintbrush to drag that water through the ink, going from that same direction, the top left to the bottom right. And I focused more on the lime punch areas, but I did put some on the other inks as well. And now you can really see that streaky Northern Lights look. So then I just dried this with my heat tool to make sure that it would set. And then I could start working on the bottom of the card. So for the bottom of the card, I started by blending some Bermuda ink, and this time I blended it in the normal fashion, going in small circles and starting off the card and then gradually getting onto the paper. And I wanted the bottom of the card to be the darkest and then gradually get lighter as it goes towards the Northern Lights. So I was sort of using less pressure as I was moving upwards towards those lights. So I should mention that I'm using the Ranger domed foam blending tools to apply this ink, as I find it gives me the most control and it's great for inks that blend well together like these. So once I've got the base of my card, I'm just going to use a bit of scrap paper and I'm just going to rip it to create a bit of a line for the horizon. And then I'm going to start at the topmost area of the card and add a tiny bit more ink along the top. And then I'm going to repeat this moving downwards. And you can always lift up this paper to make sure that it's dark enough before you remove it. So I didn't want that little bit of white showing, so I just added another line at the top which looks really nice as it covers that whiter area. And then once I'm happy with that, I'm going to repeat this moving downwards. And I wanted the bottom line to cover up that purple thumbprint that I left from earlier. So I pushed really hard to get a nice dark color here. So I'm just going to repeat this one more time. And I'm just moving that scrap of paper so that it's not perfectly lined up, and that each of these lines is slightly different from the one above and below it. And then once I'm happy with this, I'll make sure it's completely dry before moving on to the stamping. So I've just trimmed a little bit off the top and side so that the card is now 6 3/4 inches square. And I'm going to do some very simple stamping on the background because I don't want to distract too much from the Northern Lights sky. So I'm going to start with the sacred tree, and I stamped this in the pine cone ink. And then once this is dry, I'll color it in with some Copic markers. And I'm also going to stamp Valco, and I'll stamp him in the Nocturne ink. Now, because there's a lot of ink under the area where I stamp him, he's not as dark as I would like, but I'll fix that later with a black pencil crayon and just darken him a little bit more. So I just stamped him looking towards that sacred tree. And just to add a final bit of magic onto the scene, I'm going to put a star above that sacred tree. So this is the North Star Mini. And I'm just going to heat emboss this directly above the tree. So I used an anti-static bag above the tree first and then stamped the North Star Mini with some clear sticky ink. And then I used a very nice color. This is Wow Metallic Platinum. It's kind of a silvery color. And I put this onto the star, and it really brings the star to life here. And then I heat set this with my craft tool, and I prefer to do this from the back so that the embossing powder doesn't go flying. And I just love that color in the Northern Lights sky. Now for my sentiment, I decided to use this one that says, "Those who don't believe in magic will never find it." But first, I used a bit of scrap paper and that same violet chalk that's in the background and blended this over the paper so that it was big enough to cover that sentiment. Now, when you first put this ink down, it looks quite dark, but once it dries, you really get that violet chalk effect. And I'm going to do the same thing as I did with the North Star, and I'm going to heat emboss this with that same metallic platinum embossing powder. And I thought that using the same color from the background really makes this sentiment fit well with the Northern Lights scene. Now once this sentiment is heat embossed, I'm just going to trim it and add a black background to it. And then I'll just add some final touches on the sacred tree. I just added little white dots just to kind of give it a bit of a sparkle. And then I also added these along the background as well. And I think that really brings this Northern Light scene to life. Just gorgeous. And I was going to outline Valco, but I decided just to leave him plain because I think when you spend a lot of time on a background like this, you don't want to overwhelm it by having too many stamps on the foreground. So then I added my sentiment on the top left there. And then I put the whole thing onto a black background, just adding some double-sided tape onto the back first. And then this is a 7 by 7 inch black piece of paper. Now I was going to add this whole thing to a larger card, but I decided that I liked it too much and so I'm going to frame it for my craft room instead. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found this video inspiring. If you haven't already, please subscribe so that you're notified whenever I post a new video. Have a crafty day!